It's a greater privilege to be part of Ditsong's Stories series that they have been running. And this is the first time that the Smuts Foundation, which runs the Smuts House Museum, which you won't have seen yet because it's over there, and it's the first time in conjunction the two of us have been able to put a function together. It's always a privilege and an honor to welcome Professor Fransjohan Pretorius. He's a wonderful speaker, incredibly knowledgeable, and I look very forward to hearing what he has to say. So I'm Tim Lane. I'm the Managing Director of the Smuts Foundation, and we run the Smuts Museum, the library, which is like the crown jewels of this particular heritage site, which was given back to us by Wits University. And we also run the Doorncliffe Caravan Park, which is among caravanning circles quite well known. There's a further welcome. We have some interesting people here. I think you're all interesting, but there's some specifically interesting people here. One is a descendant, and I haven't managed to meet her this morning yet, is a descendant of Paul Kruger's. Another is a descendant of General de la Rey. Now, you may remember that General de la Rey, well, you may not know, but General de la Rey was in fact tasked by Paul Kruger to teach Smuts how to be a general. Well, Smuts learned so well that he took it one step further and he ended up becoming a field marshal. And he's South Africa's only field marshal. You may also wonder why the talk is happening here. Apart from the fact that we have this magnificent hall which belongs to Omar Issi's tea garden, we also, in front of the house, have a magnolia tree, the same magnolias that grow down Queen Vilhelmina, Francis Rivera Street, those with the big white flowers, the seeds of which were given to young Smuts by Emily Hobhouse. And he propagated the plant and planted it in about 1911. So it's a fairly old magnolia tree in pretty good nick. And the last rainy season we had has done it a lot of good, knowing that it's growing on dolomitic ground and battles of bush. So that gives you roughly a background of why we are here. Another interesting fact, Paul Kruger would have been 200 years old this year. Smuts would have been 150 years old. The foundation hosts a memorial service annually in May to celebrate his birthday, Smuts' birthday, not Paul Kruger's birthday. And in fact, it will be the 65th memorial service this year that is being celebrated, just as a few things. We live in a technological age where nothing can go wrong. And we live in an age where not all antibiotics kill viruses. And we have discovered that we have a virus-resistant strain on the professor's memory stick. Not his memory, his memory stick. So you will have to bear with us while and the man is very flexible in the way he can present things. So I don't think it's going to be any loss. And I'm sure he'll cope with it admirably, but just to warn you that sadly, we don't have the visuals. On that note, if you would put your hands together, I'd like you to welcome Professor Fransjohan, and he will be introduced by Marie Conrad from Ditsong. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. thank you very much for being here. It's lovely to see so many people. And I'm very disappointed that my memory stick doesn't work. But I'll try and make up for that by trying to look like Emily Hobhouse at certain stages and Lord Roberts at other stages. So let's see how it happens. Now, I was asked to talk about Emily Hobhouse, her life and legacy. Last year, I had the privilege to be invited by Mr. Koos Becker to the prestigious museum he had erected in St. Eve in Cornwall to commemorate the work of Emily Hobhouse on behalf of the Boers during the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. The museum carries the modest name of The Story of Emily. But believe you me, there is nothing modest about this museum. It simply is the best museum I've ever had the opportunity to visit. Koos Becker bought the dilapidated estate and the Anglican church across the street and took great care to restore everything on the estate as it was in 1850, 10 years before Emily's birth. Now, why would Koos Becker care to do this? Well, he falls into the bracket of a wealthy man, and he chose to pay homage to a woman barely known in Britain. Someone who came to assist the Boer women and children in the concentration camps during the Anglo-Boer War, at a time when nobody in Britain was aware of the atrocities that were going on the South African veldt or did not care to know. Koos Becker found an ideal companion in journalist Elsie Brits, who wrote a marvelous biography of Emily Hobhouse in 2016. It was published in both English and Afrikaans. The English edition is titled Emily Hobhouse, Beloved Traitor, and the Afrikaans edition is Emily Hobhouse, Geliefde Verraaier. Already in the subtitle, you see the contrast. Beloved, yes, for the Afrikaner, and traitor for the British. What is new in Elsie Brits' research? Most definitely her use of Emily's diaries and scrapbooks that were in the possession of Emily's niece, Jennifer Hobhouse Bond, who lives on Vancouver Island. She's very, very old now. Unique with some special photographs. But let us start with the British scorched earth policy, which is not covered well by Elsie Brits. After Lord Roberts, and let me try and imitate him, Lord Roberts, Chief Commander of the British Forces, occupied the Free State capital Ofentse on 13 March 1900, issued a proclamation inviting the Boers to lay down their arms and sign an oath of neutrality. They would then be free to remain on their farms on the understanding that they would no longer participate in the war. Eventually, about 20,000 Boers, about a third of the Boer force, made use of this offer. They were called the protected burghers by Roberts, and Zorgers by the Boers. Roberts had banked on this policy to end the war. But after the British occupation of the Transvaal capital Pretoria on 5 June 1900, there was no end in sight. On the contrary, the Boers started a guerrilla war, which included attacks on railway lines. In reaction, Roberts issued a proclamation on the very important date, 16 June 1900, stating that for every attack on a railway line, the closest homestead would be burnt down. This was the start of the scorched earth policy. When this didn't work, Roberts issued another proclamation in September 1900, stating that all homesteads would be burnt in a radius of 10 miles, 16 kilometers, on any attack, and that all livestock would be killed or taken away and all crops destroyed. This 10-mile radius is more than 800 square kilometers. This policy was intensified dramatically when Lord Kitchener took over from Roberts as commander in November 1900. Homesteads and whole towns were burnt down even if there was no attack on the railway. In this way, almost all Boer homesteads, about 30,000 in all, were razed to the ground and thousands of livestock killed. 2 republics were entirely laid waste. Meanwhile, the Boer commandos were reorganizing their commandos after some major setbacks. One action was to remobilize the Boers who had laid down their arms, those hands-ons. Roberts felt he should protect his oath-takers and gather them in refugee camps. The first 2 were established in Ofentse, Pretoria, in September 1900. But the scorched earth policy had led to more and more Boer women and children being left homeless. Roberts decided to bring them into the camps too. They were called the undesirables, as against the refugees. Now, these were families of Boers who were still on commando or who had been taken prisoner of war already. Initially, until March 1901, they were given fewer rations than the other inmates of the camps. So this was the start of the concentration camp system in South Africa. And this brings us to Emily Hobhouse. She was born in 1860 in this family house. Having grown up in a family of benefactors to society through the ages, actually from both sides of the family, she had a mind of her own. as supporters of the Liberal Party, they were opponents of the ruling Conservative Party at the end of the 19th century, which became involved in the Anglo-Boer War. From the 20th to her 35th year, it became her lot to look after her difficult, widowed father, whose political opinions she did not share and which prevented her from living a normal life, which every Victorian girl of the upper class led, and which meant a meaningful marriage and children. Her brothers went to the prestigious school, Eton, and to the University of Oxford. But as a girl, she had to read, learn to do the needlework, to sing, and play the piano and the violin, and to paint, and to learn to speak French. She dearly wanted to go to university, but it was not on the cards. And I've got a lovely picture taken from her room in the house, looking outside. And that was very moving for me to look at that picture, which she saw almost every day and was longing to go beyond. But it is clear that she wanted to help people. And so in 1895, she traveled to a mining town in Minnesota in the USA, where there were some Cornish mine workers. But not everything went according to plan. She had to learn the hard way that despite her good intentions and constructive work, she readily came into conflict with people and positions of authority who experienced her as a threat. And they were nearly always men. She even got engaged to an American, but this did not work out. Back in London, Emily has been involved in the South African Conciliation Committee, which campaigned for peace and goodwill between Britain and Afrikaners. They were not pro-Boer. They were anti-war. They were incorrectly labeled pro-Boer. Emily explained, our protest was more largely due to our proud desire for England's honour and our horror lest her rectitude be marred by an unjust act. While still in Britain, Emily learnt about the scorched earth policy in South Africa, and that the Boer women and children were left roofless. As a member of the South African Women and Children Distress Fund, she decided to travel to South Africa to make a difference. As she explained, deeply I had felt the call. Passionately, I resented the injustice of English policy. Wholeheartedly, I offered myself for relief to the distressed. However, it was only in the last days of December 1900, when she arrived in Cape Town, that she learned about the existence of the concentration camps. She'd known about the scorched earth policy, but nothing was said in the British papers about the concentration camps. She wrote in her diary that there were no clear knowledge of their condition. In England, we heard nothing of the formation of such camps. More than ever, I felt I must go to them. Between January and April 1901, she visited, by courtesy of Sir Alfred Milner, the British High Commissioner in South Africa, 7 Free State camps up to Bloemfontein. Emily's biographer, Elsa de Brits, very aptly calls Emily's visits to the camps looking into the depths of grief, because never in her wildest dreams had she come across such misery. Her visit was only during the beginning of the great suffering and deaths, but even so, he painted a ghastly picture. She observed the distressing conditions and lent material assistance as far as her supplies could hold. Her sympathy and moral support earned the great affection of the inmates.